Jay, it's great to have you back.
Thank you so much for having me.
You might recall it was 2022, the last time we spoke, or maybe you don't recall because that's a long time ago. So, since we spoke, just give us a little update as to what's been happening in your professional life, because I know we're glad to have you here in Arizona, as you and I just mentioned. We do have a bit of a water shortage here, so it's good to have an expert like yourself. But tell us about what you've done in the past 3 years.
I've been hibernating mostly. No, that's not true at all. I didn't realize that it was 2022, but I remember it. I remember it now. Um, so sorry about that. And it's great to be back. I've joined you at ASU. It started in January 2023. And I will say that it's been quite busy. I have, in my role here, I'm the director of science for the Arizona Water Innovation Initiative, which is a fairly intensive investment of funds from the governor's office to focus on water. Um, and it's been keeping us quite busy. I built from coming there by myself, so no one in the group, to I think we have 15 people now, um, which is a lot. It's a lot of recruiting, because most of it's happened in the last 18 months or so. So
Mm-hmm.
adding almost one new person per month. I'm looking at my self in the video. I realize how tired I look. But really doing a lot of research, and hopefully we can talk about some of that today. We've talked before about our work with the NASA satellites, especially the NASA GRACE mission, looking at water storage changes and groundwater storage changes in the southwestern U.S. and in the Colorado River Basin and California, but also globally.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a paper that's not quite accepted, but still happy to talk about it. That sort of takes the work that we're doing here in the Colorado River Basin and expands it and looks globally. And it's just I wish I had happier news, but it's things are taking a downward turn in terms of global water availability.
So the Arizona Water Innovation Initiative was, as you just and is, as you pointed out, supported by the governor, with the express purpose, as I understand it, of really trying to understand our situation here. This is not an academic, if you will, exercise. This is the expectations are that the findings can really be applied, that you are really looking at this state and its needs, its situation, and the future as best you can. Can you describe any further the expectations for that work, how it would be applied?
I think at the highest level, we hope to explore water issues and water availability and all things related to water as they support the governor's economic goals, economic growth,
Mm-hmm.
and policy goals in terms of protection of water. Um, there's another, I think, really important expectation, and that is that all of us will work with the different state agencies, will engage with stakeholders, and will really get out there.
Mm-hmm.
And by getting out there, I mean with the state agencies, but also, public lectures. And I've been involved in some of Susan Craig's, actually one, but hopefully more, rural groundwater workshops.
Mm-hmm.
They're really getting out there and talking to people about what's going on. So,
Wait, you just mentioned one thing, which is sort of what I wanted to hit on before we start talking about groundwater in earnest. You mentioned the governor, whoever the governor might be, but the
yeah,
state's interest in economic development. Phoenix continues to grow, now the fifth largest city in the United States. And I think the whole country, if not the world, is aware of our attraction of major semiconductor companies to this area, to the tune of about $165 billion for just one of them, TSMC. As you assess the water situation here and you see things that have happened in just the past few years that to some degree, accelerate our need for water? How does that all get woven together?
And it does. And it's becoming, something that we have to look at very, very carefully. I think at the highest level, agriculture is still using all the water.
Mm-hmm.
And so the data centers are, the problem there is really the energy, although let's put a pin in that. And, to the degree that the energy production depends on the water availability, then it's a problem. But in terms of strict water usage, it's, agriculture's here, and, the data centers and the chip manufacturers are much lower. So I don't think the threats to there. I don't think there's really any threat or huge concern on water availability on the economic side, especially with the chips and the data centers. I think it's really the future of agriculture that
Okay.
is the thing that we really have to be thinking about, and what we can grow and how
Mm-hmm.
efficiently we can grow it. And those are tough decisions that lie ahead.
And that relates to the reason we wanted to get in touch with you today. So, as you're well aware, you published a paper that had some pretty stark findings with regard to groundwater pumping and the implications for agriculture and for Arizona and certainly certain counties in the state. Before we get into the details of that, what's your explanation for why that story has gotten so much traction? What is it about hearing about the groundwater shortage in Arizona? And I think there's some things we want to get into in terms of detail, but just the general story. What do you think the attraction is to that depiction of the place?
I think there's a couple of reasons to explain that sort of fascination. One is that it's just invisible, right? I mean, groundwater
Mm-hmm.
is underground, and for a lot of people, that it's just a mystery. And then
Mm-hmm.
to hear that there was that much water and we lost like a Lake Mead's worth of groundwater. Like what? How did it's sort of fascinating and scary.
And describe that specifically, because you're right. That's one of those things that causes people's head to snap and say, whoa, what did you just say?
Well, so with our satellite data, we're able to track really the mass changes and the volume changes of water over large regions like the Colorado River Basin and the Upper Basin and the Lower Basin, and then some of the smaller subbasins. And so, we're able to quantify over the last 20 years. So this satellite, the NASA GRACE mission, launched in 2002. And it ran until 2017. And then a follow-on called the GRACE follow-on, cleverly, launched in 2018. And so we have over 20 years of data.
Mm-hmm.
And so we looked at about 22 years worth of data and saw the basin, the combined upper lower, so the entire Colorado River Basin lost about 52 million acre feet over that time period, of which about 2/3 was groundwater. So the total amount of I could be wrong. Maybe it's 42 million. We need to do a fact check. But the total amount of water lost from the basin was about 80% of the volume of Lake Powell and Lake Mead together. So this is like an insane amount of water. And then the amount of groundwater that was lost was, I think, about 2/3 of that. And so about like 27 million acre feet.
And describe what you mean by lost. Used and extracted, used to grow crops, and we turn that into other things. So it was used, not lost, right?
We didn't lose it. It's not like we lost track of it.
Right.
No, it didn't run away. We pumped it out of the ground, and we use it primarily for agriculture. We use it for irrigation.
Yeah.
And so a lot of it evaporates, and some of it goes into the actual plants, and some of it percolates back down. But a lot of it's lost.
Well, I asked you that because you stated at the beginning, and it's true, a lot of water, which is why I think people measure it so carefully, and also even the casual observers can look at Lake Mead and say, I see it. and I see its absence. Groundwater is something of a mystery. And so the word lost for some might suggest, yeah, like the water that's lost when I spray it onto my yard. It's gone. I don't know where it went. But yes, that water has been used. So the satellites that you use, and you explained this 3 years ago, and it's fascinating, sort of like a reverse scale. Your satellites can tell by the gravitational pull on them how much water is in the ground, because water is obviously in terms of volume and weight available to be measured that way. So that's how you're measuring the loss, the absence of groundwater, correct?
Yes, or the addition of, say, floodwater. So that's
Sure.
right. It's the gravitational tug on the satellites, which respond to the mass change on the ground from a big flood or huge depletion of groundwater.
Mm-hmm.
So the satellites literally move up and down in response to the gravitational tug, and so that's the scale part. It's like the scale, the mechanism in the scale that moves up and down. It moves up when there's less water. It moves down when there's more water on the ground. And we can do a pretty darn good job converting that into the mass of water it takes to the mass of water change that corresponds to that change in the position of the satellites.
So I think the takeaway that caught everybody's attention was that you suggested that, and or your co-authors and others who worked on this, that at the rate of depletion that you were witnessing with your ability to measure groundwater, that it's possible in the active management area, the water that we process in the Phoenix region could be depleted by the end of the century. And I think you want to make a revision to that, but I think that's what was stated, which is
that wasn't actually, that had nothing to do with the satellite measurements.
Okay. But it was in the stories.
It was in the story, and it was quite a distraction. It was just the mistake on my part. So it was in the part of the paper, in the discussion, where I was saying, "Hey, it's not even really clear how well groundwater management is working. Groundwater depletion is accelerating in California. 4 of the 5 original active management areas in Arizona haven't met their sustainability targets established 45 years ago. Oh, and by the way, the Phoenix model shows the Phoenix AMA will be out of groundwater by the end of the century." Well, that was wrong. And I knew it was. I had a conversation with someone at the Department of Water Resources a couple of weeks before the paper was accepted. And she said, "Hey, that's wrong. You should fix that." And I said, "Oh, okay." And then I completely forgot.
Yeah. And by the way, for our listeners, this show, we say this to everybody, we are not about gotcha anything.
No, it wasn't even a gotcha thing. And it was not intended to be. And no, it's none of that. So it was a mistake. And, it's just a lesson also to, my academic colleagues that, you have to be very, very careful.
Sure.
And on the other hand, it's difficult to be perfect.
And that my reason for bringing this up is not about catching so much the mistake, is that Phoenix is often cited in major publications nationally, globally, usually when something's not going right? It's really hot, right? Look at those temperatures. Oh, look, they have a shortage of water. Look at the fires that are approaching places like this. So this relates to my question about why the story gets picked up. I think when issues are rounded off, they're easily redistributed. And so I think the correction that I know you've made around that particular issue doesn't hide the fact that what you said at the beginning is we do have a shortage of water here, and it's a real issue.
The message of the paper is that there is large-scale groundwater depletion.
Yes.
And that the AMAs, part of the message of the paper is the AMAs may or may not be making a difference. So let's talk about that, because in the paper, we differentiate between the regions, the subbasins of the state that have access to surface water. And so, Phoenix, Pinal, Tucson have access to Central Arizona Project water. And so in the study, that region is still losing groundwater, just not as much. It's still being depleted, but not as fast as some of the other places, like to the southeast and to the west. And so the question that's out there is it the availability of surface water? Is it the management? Is it both? we did not go into that in the paper.
Mhm.
Ours is like strictly an accounting paper.
Explain to our audience what an AMA is.
Sorry, active management area.
Yeah, and what that entails. The idea is that let's try to understand how much we think we have, how much we'll have in the future, and thus husband that water properly to achieve whatever ends we want, whether it's agriculture,
right.
residential, whatever it might be. Is that so? AMAs are part of the lexicon that you work with all the time. You probably can offer a better definition.
Well, it's exactly that. There are areas in the state, and there are now I think 7 of them. And there's some other areas that have a different name, irrigation non-expansion areas, where groundwater is more or less managed. And there are sustainability targets and so on. And there are restrictions about future growth. And it's managed versus unmanaged. So it's great that management is there. The downside is that it's only 18% of the state by area. So that leaves a whole lot of Arizona unmanaged. And, that's why we see a lot of the depletion that we do see.
And I think, as you said at the very outset, a lot of it is dedicated to agriculture.
It is.
Right. And so,
and it's not Arizona, right? It's around the world that we use most of the water for agriculture. And so in places, and even in places that do have groundwater management, we still see these problems. I mentioned, California, okay, its Sustainable Groundwater Management Act is still being implemented. So it's sort of unfair to, maybe unfair to say this, but the truth is that, it was passed in 2014, and that was 10 years ago, and groundwater depletion is accelerating. So to me, one of the reasons for writing this paper is, update, understand what's going on. It hasn't been done in a while. We can do things at higher resolution now than we could, say, 10 years ago. Plus, we want to see, are things getting better or getting worse? And guess what? They're getting worse.
There's a whole lot to say there about high resolution. I assume that the satellite that was launched in 2018 provided a lot of that, correct?
That would be a good assumption, but also not true. So the satellite that was launched in 2018, the follow-on, was actually designed to be exactly like the first one.
Okay.
So that we'd have continuity. And so it was a strategy to get that satellite funded. So it came under a category, in Congress that was considered a climate continuity mission rather than new research. So it allowed us to get, it's been another almost decade worth of data. No, the enhanced resolution has come on the data processing side.
Okay.
And so we're down to, and it has to do with combining with some NASA land surface models that simulate the hydrology on the Earth's land surfaces. And so we're down to 25 kilometers. To get that higher resolution with satellites, and that's something that the community certainly aspires to. That can happen, but it just takes it more complicated. Right now, there's 2 gray satellites that work together in a tandem orbit. To get the higher resolution, you can use 4 satellites. You can use 6 satellites. And that's how, in this case, with this technology, that's how you would do it. But it becomes like a space ballet because someone is literally like keeping track of those satellites and move them back into position and all that. I mean, there's like a team of humans that do that.
Well, let's come back to the implications of the technology that allows you to know what you do about water and the value of that kind of foresight, given some of the changes coming out of Washington, D.C., but linking it to another issue out here that we all know, and that's the Colorado River. Explain for the layperson the relationship between the two. If I'm looking at water in the West, and particularly in Arizona, California, how do I think about groundwater and the shortages that are evident in Lake Mead and the Colorado River? How do I link those two productively?
Well, so, wherever you live, you can probably look up from your local water district or your state Department of Water Resources how much your state uses, relies on surface water versus how much it relies on groundwater. And those things vary. It's true in Arizona. It's true in California. Those things vary over time, depending on whether it's been a wet year or a dry year. And they vary in space. Are you close to surface water? Are you far away? Are you close to the Cap Canal? Are you close to the river or not? And in times when there's not a lot of surface water, like a dry year in California, or the continued drought, mega drought that we're having in the Colorado River Basin, less and less Colorado River surface water becomes available. And right, the allocation of the Colorado River water is governed by this complex, collection of treaties, the law of the river, and goes back 100 years. But everyone knows it's been over allocated, so that the promises for water outstrip the available water. So now we've been in negotiations. You've covered these things, and we're looking at what's going to happen post 2026. Okay, so let's go to 2026, and imagine if Arizona gets its surface water allocation, its Colorado River water allocation cut by 50%. Right. So then I don't know what the number is going to be. I'm just throwing something out there.
And our
water is going to have to come from groundwater.
Right. And our listeners should know there's a negotiation. By the way, the negotiation has been going on for over a century, but there is a deadline in 2026 by which the upper basin, lower basin states are expecting or intending to resolve who gets what and the allocations you're describing. So the next year, 2026, is not just a number you threw out there. There's a real date by which we have to make a decision about this.
So then we need to anticipate what those changes might be, and certainly think about how they are going to impact, or if they will undoubtedly, of course, because we have no other choice, increase our reliance on groundwater. And so then that really speaks to the expansion of groundwater management beyond the 18%.
Right.
Because if this is all the water we have, we cannot burn through it in a few decades or even a century, because a century from now, there could literally be no water. So we have to be extremely careful. And that's part of what I'm trying to, the message that I'm trying to share. And I appreciate you having me on the podcast, because, so many of our politicians, not our current administration, I think they're very forward thinking, but so many politicians, and again, it's not just Arizona, they might not even understand this. And they're the ones who are making the decisions. And so if someone, a new governor comes in and doesn't understand the situation and doesn't, try to get things under control a little bit more. Yeah. It's another 4 years, another 8 years, of continued losses. And I really fear for the future, not just of Arizona, but of the Southwest and the dry regions around the world that rely so much on groundwater, especially in context of climate change, where those dry areas are already getting drier and having less opportunity for replenishment through rainfall.
Well, that's an interesting comment in that, as you well know, the Tenacross project is built upon the idea that we can see the future. We have a lot of data and shows.
I know you can see the future. I can't see the future.
Well, no, you can. I mean, in other words, you can measure what the depletion rate would be, and therefore, hey, we have to take care of this resource because it's measurable, and we know that. And so water is, I think, the most outstanding issue in that regard, because it is so measurable. You know how much you have. Sometimes you can see it, like in surface water, and groundwater a little bit less so. I assume, and I could be very wrong about this, so I'm winging this comment, the active management areas tend to surround the highly populated areas. Presuming that if you set up systems for livability and businesses in cities, you need to have a pretty good degree of assurance that you have the amount of water to support that population, whatever else you want to do with it. Maybe make chips. The further you get out from the major population centers and into the ag areas, they do not have as strict active management areas. Tell us about how the overlay of those kinds of policies in areas not used to doing that is going to be explained, pitched, accepted, and applied. And I know that that's a loaded question, in that that's not going to be easy. But how do you move it from the populated areas into others?
So excellent question. And a lot of it, I think, starts with raising awareness amongst the general population. There are plenty of industrial farmers who already know what's going on
Hmm.
and know what they're doing is legal, and know that they can extract a lot of groundwater quite legally. So I think raising awareness amongst the general population, I think, is really, really important. I think
Hmm.
that the pitch, the selling of this is the future. There are many ways to do it. We have the groundwater is like a big giant retirement account, um, and that's all we have. And some people are using more than others, and and some people are draining it, and so we need to really think about future generations. I have a colleague here that I only just met email is our colleague Ed Finn,
Hmm.
and just recently said to me by email, and I was asking this question, how do we? I'm having trouble, getting people to understand this, and he said something like, one thing you can do is sort of the futurist perspective. Ask people what they want to leave, for their grandkids to inherit in 20. What do you want that farm's water availability to look like in 2060?
Hmm.
When you bring it to that personal level,
Hmm.
I think it becomes really important. The
So,
other thing is
go
we
ahead.
need to let people know that this is their water. We have no, as a scientist, I have no, policy influence. Um, and, you know, no way that it's not just our mandate to try to manage groundwater. We have no authorization to do anything like that. What we want you to know is that it's your water and it's disappearing, and it's disappearing for these reasons. Did you know that? Did you know that, if you don't have any surface water, that people are taking money from your shared retirement account and they're taking 100 times more than you are? Did you know
Hmm.
that?
Hmm. So for, again, a lay audience that might say, yeah, Jay, that makes sense to me. Water is a public good. It's ours, right? It belongs to some degree to all of us. Others might say, no, the water underneath the land that I own is my water, and I'm going to use it in this particular way. How do I reconcile those two things in terms of access and who actually
Okay, so the
owns the water?
latter would be fine if you could just draw a box around your property
Right,
and just pump that water and
right,
stop. But that's not what happens.
right.
And because aquifers or underground soil and rock units are continuous, way,
Hmm.
kilometers and miles past your property, what happens is that with your well, you are sucking in, drawing
Hmm.
into that well much when you beyond your property boundary. You're drawing
Right,
in water from your neighbors,
right.
and there's no real restriction on that,
Hmm.
and that's a problem.
And there may not be restrictions on that, as you pointed out. It's legal for people who running large industrial agricultural enterprises. I think you mentioned them a few minutes ago. They're big business. That's big business. Do they have a sense of a timeline with regard to the resource availability upon which that industry depends, at the rate at which they're growing things? Do you think that they know?
They haven't shared it with us, but went was out on La Paz with one of these rural groundwater workshops that our colleague Susan Craig organized, and heard a story of a farmer who was surrounded by four large industrial alfalfa farms, and each of those farms had 1,000-foot wells, 1,000 feet deep, which is quite deep,
Hmm.
in 6 feet in diameter, pumping constantly. So his water table is just, dropping and dropping. Um, but my point is, if they have taken the time to drill the 1,000-foot wells, then I'm sure they were looking at water availability on the way down.
Hmm.
And so they probably have a better understanding than our Department of Water Resources does.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know that's one of the frustrations amongst decision makers that I think you and others have brought up. Decision makers would like to understand how much we have available to us, right? Which is still, in spite of your good work and the GRACE missions and other situations, we could use a tighter understanding of those things to this day, especially in the areas that have not been actively managed. So pushing this a little bit into the future, you mentioned at the very beginning, the sacrifices with regard to water usage is going to come, I hate to say it, at the expense of ag, but we'll not be able to grow as much the way we've been growing it, whether those industrial farms or other situations. For, again, a lay audience, okay, how do those operations close down just when they dry up, which has happened in the state, usually for smaller farmers, family farms, or other things? How does that transition get made in the most fair, useful, productive way? So how do we make that shift?
Yeah, it's another great question, and a couple of things come to mind. First is that the value of those water rights that the farmers have, right? There's value to that, and so there has to be some compensation there. So that's one issue. The other issue is the food security, and so if we decide to transition away from some agriculture here, we have to understand what the food gap might be. Will there be a food gap, or are we just going to stop growing crops for export? So these are all things that we have to think about. But food, how do we replace that food? And so that's another thing to think about. But you're right. I mean, I can't remember the statistic, but I wrote it in an opinion piece that I wrote that came out last summer, 2024. I forgot the statistic, but the number of farms in California, like the acreage, right, the rate at which the farms are disappearing, are being converted or just gone fallow, is pretty significant, and that's part of it. I mean, if the water's not there, then there's that's sort of like the slow change, right? If the individual family farms just fold up.
And it's interesting you mentioned California, where I know you've done a lot of work and in all kinds of ways. And you mentioned, if I own a piece of property and I'm drilling, I'm not just taking the water that is contained by the property lines of my farm. Water doesn't care about state boundaries either. And that's true of Colorado and how that gets used. As you've observed it, because you've been at this a long time, and we've been talking about the Arizona Water Resources Authority. California has the equivalent. Other states do as well. What have you observed about state-to-state discussions?
When it comes to groundwater, there are no state-to-state discussions.
Right.
And I think that's becoming a problem. And there are no national discussions. We were starting to have national discussions before the current administration came in and stopped them. But I think we're on a pretty good pathway there at the end of 2023. And so the discussions are held within states, and the states have different sort of levels of concern, and that varies with political party. I think in California, when I was there, there was a moment, or because of the severity of the drought, and I mean, California uses a lot more groundwater than Arizona. The scope, the scale of the agriculture is, could be 100 to 1. I mean, it's that big. So there was a real recognition, statewide, that I think because it's such a big agricultural state, and because of the severity of the droughts that were happening in the 2000s and in the 2010s, and because of the administration that was in place with the Brown administration, that they were able to pass the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, and it was voted in. I mean, it was a vote, it was a ballot, so the population voted for it. Here in Arizona, I don't quite see it that same way. I see more resistance. And it could be that, because the agriculture isn't as big, the scale, I mean, in a relative sense, it's almost bigger, because the importance of groundwater, it's like existential crisis. If the groundwater disappears, it's a bigger problem. But I don't know. I sense, I've only been here a couple of years. I mean, came in 2023, but I sense that there's more resistance here.
Hmm.
We have an administration that I think is, for current governor's administration, extremely water forward.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure about what the future will hold, but I'm quite concerned.
Yeah. And I want to end on a positive note, and having people like you addressing this issue is one of those things I would point to. But the change in administration at the federal level has thrown all bets up for reconsideration, and the refunding of things like the next version of GRACE and the updating of what you as a research scientist would want to see happening, I'm sure is now, I'm just guessing, but it's probably in doubt.
Let me stop you in your tracks. So if you want to end on a good note, this could be the one.
Yeah.
So just over the past few days, the analysis of the latest budget discussions, actually the water satellites are actually safe. Some other older satellite missions have been cut. Research funding has been cut for sure, but the satellite missions, the next GRACE mission, the SWOT mission for surface water and ocean topography, the SMAP mission, soil moisture active passive, which refers to its active and passive radars. Those are all safe. So, if there's optimism to be had, that could be it. We have those data, and they're critical.
That's great, and it sounds like you just got that information. So none of us
yesterday.
So I wouldn't have known that. And how do you explain that? The obviousness of the existential.
It's so new. I don't have an explanation yet. And as you know, I have several students that work in the different NASA labs, and I don't think they know yet either. So it's so new. I mean, I literally saw it. My daughter sent me a text, and then I saw something on LinkedIn. This is literally yesterday. So I don't have the answers yet. But hey, it's breaking news.
And that is a great place to end, because I was going to try to pull another positive thing out in a different way. But the fact that, let's hope, there was recognition of the existential importance of water and the good work that you and others have been doing, and the value of that information suggests that, yeah, those missions ought to continue. I would hope that somehow that same kind of awareness is brought to someone who came from the Gulf area, tracking of storms and other things that also cause existential concerns. Jay, it is so great to have you at ASU. It's so great to have you in this region, and I know the value that you're bringing to this discussion. I'm sure the governor and others really appreciate it. Just want to thank you for sharing what you know, even up to the minute, with us, and wish you the best in your good work going forward.
Thanks so much, and thanks for having me on again. Really appreciate it.